Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russel Vickers. I'm with I presume you can see my screen, what I'm sharing. So I'm Russel Vickers. I'm with Jaguar Land Rover, and I'm also director of Future Mobility Campus Ireland. So today I'll just talk a little bit around the landscape of globally what's happening from a mobility perspective, both from a global perspective and in Ireland, probably from the perspective of Jaguar Land Rover and Future Mobility Campus, and just to give you a flavour from those perspectives of what's happening in the area. So you can ask questions in the chat along the way. I'm getting people still can't hear. Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, that's good. It's not me then. I'll let people work out their issues. Okay. So I'll just keep going as is anyway. So just a little bit to talk about my background. So I'm a graduate of what was DIT in Kevin Street, and most of my career has been in ASIC or computer chip design. So I worked for a lot of different companies, starting off with parts in Dublin, then moved over to the US, worked with Xilinx, worked at Texas Instruments in France, Ericsson in Sweden, and then finally moved back to Ireland to work with Intel in Shannon. So that was around in 2011. I worked with Intel for 6 years, and as part of that, I made a career change, moving from the chip design world into the automotive world, which is something I've always kind of wanted to work in. I'm a big car guy, so that was my passion. And from that, then the opportunity arose to work with JLR in the new venture that started off in Shannon, and I'll talk a little bit in detail about that. So just to talk a little bit about Jaguar Land Rover and our strategy. So we have a strategy, it's called Destination Zero. It's basically that, in our view, the strategy is the world of zero emissions, zero accidents, and zero congestion. And that's what our ambition around the company is, to achieve all of those goals by creating products that will allow us to do that. So just to talk a bit about how that fits in with the blueprint of Jaguar Land Rover. Destination Zero, as you can see, is at the center of that, surrounded by the two brands of Jaguar Land Rover, and at the bottom then it's all around customer first, and then how do we basically build experiences that people love for life. So that's kind of what our corporate values are, and the blueprint around that. Just to talk a little bit around what's happening in Shannon. So you may or may not be aware that Land Rover have now a presence in Ireland for the last coming up on 3 years. It's based in the Shannon region and the Shannon zone, and this building here is our home. It's a software centre, primarily focused on in-vehicle and cloud technologies. So on the in-vehicle side, we're looking at disrupting the architecture of the vehicles and how we move forward that. We've got teams working on driving, and we also have teams that are working on cloud-based services to process all the data that comes from the vehicles and offer services to our customers around that. At the moment, we're around 250 people employed on site. Started off with just a small number 3 years ago, and that number has grown quite tremendously in the last few years, resulting in this building and also a large workshop that's down the road from this, based in the free zone. So it's quite an exciting project, and it's really great to see a company like Jaguar Land Rover come into Ireland. And it also is a testimony, I think, to the software and the engineering expertise that we have in Ireland, and also how disruption is basically forcing OEMs to look at these different technology specialists, I would say. So I'll talk a little bit more about why that is, but that's just a little bit about the centre that we have in Shannon. So the disruptive side of this. So this is kind of something that was put together probably pre-COVID, so probably I need to do disruptive squared on this slide. The disruptive forces are already being disrupted themselves. But just to talk a little bit about in the automotive world, how we view these disruption It's known as ACES, and I'll go into a bit of detail of that, or it's also known as CASE, the acronym, and it basically stands for Autonomy, Connected Electrification, and Shared Mobility. So I think probably a lot of people on the call are familiar with these, with at least have heard of these technologies. I mean, really, from an automotive point of view, these are something that, huge disruptive forces. Really, like in the last 100 years, you could say that automotive has been on a more sort of evolutionary phase where this is a real revolution, and you're going to see lots of new players come into the market, and probably at the same time you'll see some players go out of the market based on these disruptive forces. And I'll talk a little bit around each one of those as we go through the deck. But this is something that is kind of, I would liken this, from my Ericsson days, this is a bit like the iPhone moment in time for automotive. The iPhone came out 2007, 2008, and pretty much that just destroyed the Nokias and the Ericssons of the world. So these forces have the potential to do that, and probably should be another letter in here for pandemics, because I think just what we're seeing currently in the last couple of months is really something that none of us expected, and something that's really going to have a further impact on this, but also create some opportunities, and I think that's important to realize that. So just to talk around autonomous vehicles for a little bit, we've probably all seen the robo-taxis, the Waymo vehicles rolling around Silicon Valley with the sensors on them. People kind of get the concept of why they're doing it, but really why are we doing this, and what's the business reasons behind it? So a huge part of this is safety, and how can we improve safety? When you look at the amount of road deaths that occur across the world due to from accidents, it's really quite a staggering number, and it's a number that we live with, and we're used to that number, but it's something that we probably shouldn't really have to accept anymore. So how do we use technology to help reduce those risk factors is an important piece of this. The access to these vehicles, and also then what will that do for revolutionizing basically shared mobility? In the last couple of years, Uber and Lyft and shared mobility services have really become prevalent. People now go to cities where they exist, and they don't think about renting cars anymore. They just basically, just Uber around the place. And that's really something that, a few years ago we wouldn't have thought that possible. But to make the Uber model work, you really have to reduce that cost per mile. And that's really where they're really putting a lot of investment. The shared mobility players, Waymo, Uber, Lyft, putting a lot of investment into making proper robo-taxis to reduce that cost per mile. Just talk a little bit more about the different levels. So you've probably heard of these levels. You might know what they mean, but there are basically proper quantified levels of what the automation of levels of automation. So you're used to your level 0, where it's just you on the road, and it's you and your senses basically determining how the vehicle performs on the road. And now as we start to get to move forward in time, both from just higher end luxury manufacturers, these services in, or even services being mandated by the safety agencies, you're starting to see more of these features put in. So you're starting to see advanced emergency braking, things like that. And then as we move forward into the higher levels, level 3, level 4, you're talking about areas where the vehicle can take control in certain situations. So whether it's something like you see with Tesla, where the vehicle's traveling by itself down the highway, but the human is able to take control at any time, or to the cases where you go to level 4 and level 5, and then you can start to really think about it. You just jump in the car, tell it where to go, and it drives you there. You might even have a steering wheel, for example, in the level 5 cases. I definitely was a lot more bullish on these technologies when I first, especially when I was in Intel. I thought it seemed like it was imminent, the higher levels of automation. But as we've started to go through this and I suppose peel the onion, you're starting to see that it is a big challenge, but at the same time it's a big opportunity. And just to show you kind of how big that opportunity is, you can see this cluster of companies that are involved in this, and this is probably only a subset of this, but you see the companies that you'd expect to be in there. So the automotive companies of the world, the tier 1 suppliers, some of the the mobility providers. But then when you break it down on the sensing and processor levels, et cetera, and software levels, it then starts to stretch out further and further. And you see names in there that you mightn't have expected, like Sony and Panasonic, for example. And there's a lot of companies that are looking to get into this space because it's a huge space on every level. And this is kind of, if you're a company and you missed the basically the internet 2.0 boom, or you missed the smartphone boom, companies their shareholders are almost forcing them to get into these markets. And there is a lot of technologies that they have that actually will serve a lot of these purposes. So that's kind of where you see these synergies. So then just to move on a little bit and talk a bit about the vehicles themselves, and to give you an idea of what an autonomous vehicle does or what it's trying to do, and talk a bit around those technologies. So this is a picture of one of our current test vehicles that we have that we're using for development of algorithms and hardware and software and things like that. And basically, there's a large array of sensors, so that's the first piece. So you have sensors such as camera, which most people are familiar with, radar, I think most people are familiar with. You also have LiDAR, which is like an advanced form of radar, and also positioning and those type of sensors as well. And basically, they're all there to build up a picture of the world around it. So the first thing that you really need to do from an autonomous vehicle point of view is you need to sense the area around you and detect the free space that you can safely travel through. Then you need to plan how you're going to get through that free space. And then the next step then is, once you've planned where you're going to go, then you need to actually drive through those spaces. So that's breaking it down to a quite simplest level, but that's how a lot of components are basically put together on these vehicles. So from a sensing point of view, you can see the amount of sensors that you actually need to have, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail on the next slide. But it's a lot of data. It's huge amounts of data, huge amounts of processing, and nothing that's been seen in automotive before from a vehicle level. The next step of that then is basically you need to take all that data from the different sensor sets, fuse all that data together. So the camera will be telling you one thing, the radar might be telling you something slightly different, and the LiDAR something else depending on lighting conditions, time of day, rain, etc. And then from that, then you detect the free space and you basically navigate through that space. So that's pretty much on a simplistic level how it works, but it is how the components are essentially put together in a lot of cases. To give you an idea of the amount of vision that these systems have to have, you're essentially trying to recreate the human in this sense. But probably with obviously, but it's recreate and improve the human, especially from the sensing side. So you can see here you're getting a full 360 view from all the sensors, whether it's the longer range or medium range radar, the cameras themselves, even the ultrasonics in the vehicle, basically for when you're using and reversing, things like that. Obviously, the sensing picture is mostly forward facing because we move forward and we move forward at speed, and we want to be able to. We want these vehicles to be able to perform on highway conditions. So whether it's 130 kilometers an hour or even beyond to support autobahn speeds. But the faster you go, obviously, the further into the distance you need to see. So that's why we have so many sensors on the vehicle. And then the challenge is, how do we move into a product phase with this? How many cameras can we feasibly put on a vehicle? How many radars, LiDARs, and what's the cost associated with that? So that's pretty much from the sensing side. The next phase of disruption, and this is probably something that this is a no-brainer, let's say, but it's something that is probably been a bit lower on the radar, I think, from a technology point of view. But electrification is really something that's really massive. So we've seen pictures like this, and we know why we need to reduce our CO2 emissions. And we're starting to see a big move towards electric vehicles. And for example, with Jaguar Land Rover, we'll basically, I think from next year, we'll have a electric option on all of our powertrain across all our vehicle lines, essentially, whether that's a plug-in hybrid or a full electric. or a mild hybrid, some essence of that, basically to help reduce CO2 emissions. We've seen these slides as well around how much transport adds into that picture, so we know that there's work to be done here. And I think we're starting to see the tide. You're starting to see the critical mass basically pick up on this, and even pick up of electric vehicle sales in the last few years has really moved on, especially in the last year or so. It's not just driven by people's goodwill, it's also been driven by strict targets. So in the EU, for example, the targets are lowering every year across the vehicle fleets of how many emissions your total vehicle fleet can emit. So on bigger vehicles, obviously, there's more mass. You need to figure out ways of how to reduce the emissions on those bigger vehicles. And that's where systems like full electric or even plug-in hybrid systems really come into play with this. And you can see this where, for a large part, most of the distances from the vehicles that we collect data on, you can see that most people tend to drive something like maybe 20 kilometers a day. So it's not that difficult for a small battery to be able to transport most people around at nearly all times, and then maybe only have to rely on a combustion engine or a bigger battery during longer trips. And we all know about range anxiety, but it is something that we can get over. And that's basically this move from electric to from combustion engines to electric motors. One thing I didn't really touch on too much in this presentation is just on the connected side. So connected side is the connectivity side of this is also a huge thing, and more vehicles are connected. So for example, from a Jaguar Land Rover portfolio point of view, all our vehicles are connected. We actually have 2 modems in our vehicles, where we have a connection for telematics, where we can track the vehicles, things for like stolen vehicle tracking, also e-call and b-call. So if you break down or if you're in a crash, that will automatically call the call centers to help you out. And then there's also services then that are basically sort of a must-have in vehicles today. It's basically because people are used to smartphones, they want to have Spotify in the vehicle, they want to have Netflix in the vehicle, they want to have all of these services. They're paying a lot of money for these cars, so connectivity is almost is just table stakes at this stage. That will only increase, and what you're also going to see is a lot of interesting ways on how the vehicle actually interacts, not just with the back ends of cloud providers, but how it also interacts with the infrastructure, whether it's talking to toll booths, or even it's basically just passing its data in a smart city to do things like where you turn the vehicle into electric only mode, and you're basically telling the rest of the city center that you're in that mode based on time limits and all these kind of business cases that come out of that. So what will this start to look like when you put it all together? Well, is our first one. You can see some of the sensors, you can see around the cameras and stuff like that, and then most of the work is then done on the most of the work is so this is kind of what people might have their own artistic take on whether they like this or not, but you can see that even there's a substantial amount of technology in these vehicles, and to get it into that form factor is very impressive. So that's kind of where we are in a global sense around this. Just in terms of, I'll talk a little bit about the Irish context now, and then we'll move on and talk a bit about the Mobility Campus. So slides will flash. Perfect. Okay, so just moving on to Ireland. So I think this is lifted basically from the IDA, and they put together a paper on why connected autonomous vehicles in Ireland, basically. But I think probably a lot of people in this call they're working in one of these companies, or they're working at least from a research point of view in one of these areas. We all know the story, the success story around this. So this is kind of where, due to the disruption that we're seeing in automotive, automotive is coming to us. So from an Irish context, the strengths of all these companies is basically what automotive is trying to become. A lot of automotive companies have publicly come out and said they're trying to become tech companies, or they're going to become a tech company. They realize that just selling the metal boxes by themselves is not going to cut it as a business model anymore, and they need to move to these different types of models and really look at themselves as technology companies. So that's something that's really, really great, and you can see that sort of vote of confidence by the likes of Jaguar Land Rover coming here. There's also GM, Vallejo obviously have a big presence here as well, and they've had that for a number of years. But there's a lot of companies that are involved in this area, and I'll highlight a few as we go. So I think where it stemmed from, just to give you guys a bit of a history on this, JLR in Ireland started around 3 years ago, and around the same time, the IDA, in conjunction with Lero and Enterprise Ireland and SFI, etc., and ITS Ireland, were formed a forum basically called CAV Ireland. And they realised, based on the picture before that, what the context was for Ireland around this, and they wanted to create a forum to move this forward. So Jaguar Land Rover has been involved in that from pretty early on in the process. And this is how we kind of managed to move the whole process on in conjunction with all of these different agencies and companies. So at the moment, CAV Ireland is a forum. The intention is to form that as a proper cluster. So those discussions are ongoing at the moment between IDA Ireland and Enterprise Ireland. And the idea is to have a cluster basically where industry and research can benefit off that. From both a networking point of view and bringing things forward. So that's in progress. The Future Mobility Campus, which I'll talk about a bit later, is almost a sister project of that, which will obviously have a lot of the same companies involved, but that's more focused on the testing side of it and the testbed side of that. But I'll talk about that a bit more as we go. So based on the forming of CAV Ireland, there was a couple of things that we basically realized very early on in this road. One is that, and not just to focus just on the autonomous bit, but to start off with that piece, the first piece is that we need to be able to test on Irish roads. So you've seen the vehicles traveling around Arizona, California, you have autonomous vehicle testing on public highways in the UK, all across the geos, China, it's pretty much everywhere. But in Ireland, currently, we're unable to test vehicles on the road. So we can put the vehicles on the road and collect data from a sensing point of view, and that's what you'll see some vehicles going around doing that. But basically, to let the vehicle actuate itself, that's something that's currently not allowed due to the Irish legislation. And it basically comes down to the definition of control. So basically, the Irish, not to rat hole on this, but basically Irish law says the driver must be in control at all times, and that's kind of the definition of it. And then it doesn't really go into much further. So control, you have to have your hands on the steering wheel. Doesn't mean you have to have your feet on the pedals. But we already know that we have cruise control, we can take our feet off, and we have lane keep assist and those type of services. So in fairness, we have been working with the Department of Taoiseach and the Department of Transport and the RSA to really move this forward. And Arup has been involved in this from a consultancy point of view to really show best practice from across the globe. So thankfully that is moving forward. So as of December 2018, there was a guidelines proposed about how a company or a research agency would go about putting a vehicle on the road, because obviously safety is of paramount importance. And I'm not just throwing that out there from a sort of, as a soundbite, but it's something that, it would have, it's obviously very important to protect the public and the perceptions of the vehicles as well, because, you saw what happened in Arizona with the Uber accident, and that really sets things back. And it only takes one small thing to really set this back. So we need to be very cognizant and very careful about how we move that forward. But we have been working quite extensively on this with the Department of Transport. And just before, at the end of last year, we got the backing from the government basically to change the Road Traffic Act to allow, from a legislation point of view, to allow autonomous testing on the roads. So that's something that we're hoping will make it into the next revision, and it's currently in progress. From a sort of industry point of view, it's something that we really have to have. We can't say we're in this club of connected autonomous vehicles or future mobility if we can't put the vehicles on the road. It's kind of it's a basic thing that we need at this point. But in fairness, it is moving forward. The second piece that we also identified then is that the need for basically a hub for this and a test bed. So as JLR, for example, we have extensive testing facilities in the UK. We have our own test tracks. We also utilize third-party test tracks across the globe, and that's something that we've done for a long time. But from an Irish context, it makes sense that we have something based in Ireland, not just for the likes of General Motors or Valeo or JLR to be able to use that testing facility locally, but also all of these technology companies that are interested in this area, whether it's an Analog Devices that are developing radar in this space, or other companies like that, or Cisco, or even a company like Mergon, who are very interested in this space as well. They need something that's localized, and we also want something that creates a real collaborative ecosystem for this, because that's a big part of this, right? Not one company is going to be able to do this on their own, and you can see even the amount of investment that companies such as Waymo, the billions they're pouring into this. It's a significant. It's almost like a moonshot type project, to be honest, at least from the autonomous point of view. But that was where the idea for the test bed came from, and hopefully, really, what I'd love to see come out of this is that research institutes and startups. We can see some really great startups start to come out of this space, and we know some of those that are in this space already, and hopefully they can utilize this and further push this on, because we all know the power of what collaboration can bring. Obviously, from a government point of view, it also creates jobs, and it'll also create inward investment. So, just to give a little bit of context again, I think this just reiterates what I said about why do we need this in Ireland. This is kind of a snapshot of the global picture at the moment, of how many test beds are being set up, what the rules are for the different countries, etc. And this is just a small snapshot. At the moment, we're kind of not on the register at all in terms of any of these technologies. And that's the reason why we feel this is necessary. We're not looking to create something that's a me too. We really want to create something that adds value, especially from the Irish context. And the good thing about where we are at the moment, and especially even the pandemic, is actually giving rise to some opportunities, because there aren't that many self-driving or test beds that are really focused on the future technologies such as connectivity and 5G and V2X and all those types of technologies that are coming down the line. So that's something that we have technological strengths in Ireland, and it's something that we can really kind of make our own, in conjunction with working with some of these other parties across the globe, because data is a huge part of this, and how do you share data and learn from each other, for example. So that's kind of the overall context of Ireland. Now I'll just change tack a little bit and just talk about. I'm just checking how I'm doing on time. So yeah, I think we're okay. I'm just in terms of the Future Mobility Campus Ireland project. So I'll just give you an idea of what that's about, and then we should have maybe 10 minutes at the end to take questions, or we can go from there. So what is the Future Mobility Campus Ireland, or FMCI? So this is a proposal that was submitted to the Regional Enterprise Development Fund, and which is managed by Enterprise Ireland, and obviously is run by the Department of DBEI. And it basically in a lot of cases, it's created a lot of great centres, innovation centres around Ireland. This was the proposal to create this project. And then I'll run through this deck to give you an idea of what we want to come out of this. So just to say actually that from on the 8th of January, this project was announced. and we are moving forward with that. So I'll give a little bit of a snapshot about where we are in a minute. So I think we covered this already. The four disruptive forces, the ACEs or CASE, so autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. But really, it's great to hear about these disruptive forces. But what's that? What does that mean for us? What can we get out of this? So really, there's a massive opportunity both from an EU funding and just a general investment side of it, to really create a lot of inward investment into Ireland from these technologies. We're seeing a lot of the next phase of the Horizon 2020 projects. There's going to be a big funding pot for these type of projects, and this is something that the EU are obviously they want leadership in, and we really want Ireland to be part of that solution and part of the pie this time. So from our point of view, we kind of view that those four forces can be based around three pillars: so emerging technologies and standards, roadside infrastructure, and the collaborative ecosystem. As I said earlier, this won't be done alone, basically. So to go into a little bit more detail about the project. Project is a piece of infrastructure, just to make that clear. It's based in the Shannon Free Zone. So the Free Zone is owned and managed by Shannon Commercial Properties. The Shannon Development also own the airport. So there's quite a large area that's been there since the 50s. And there's a really good documentary last week on RT around how Shannon got built up. And that's kind of this project is hopefully a leg up on all of that good work that's been put in up to this point. So to talk a little bit more detail about what it actually looks like. So this is kind of a rendering, but a lot of these buildings actually do exist. But so basically we want to build and operate the first test bed in Ireland for connected autonomous vehicles. And what do we need to do that? So we need to have high connectivity on all the roadways. So whether it's having roadside units that can talk to and from the vehicles or sense what's going on the roads, or even just covered by 5G edge units and things like that. That's the first piece of this. The second piece is then we want to have smart and connected junctions. So actually there's no traffic lights in the free zone. We're actually going to put some in, which we can use for different testing scenarios. How could an autonomous vehicle basically control their lights so that for optimum driving performance, all these different types of use cases. The third part of that then is that there'll be a control center and a workshop. So the control center will put all the data together and the scenarios. And then the second piece of that is a workshop for different companies to fit the sensors that they would like. It's important to note that this is utilizing the existing infrastructure that's in the free zone. And basically this will be a live test bed that would be shared with the public and the people that use this on a daily basis. But there'll be certain cases maybe where there might be a certain scenario that we might want to use the road. But in most cases, these vehicles will just be, they'll just be around, not really causing any impact to the sort of from a traffic point of view or anything like that. They'll just be interacting with the vehicles and the street furniture, and that's really something that's very necessary to understand how these vehicles perform in the real world. Before they get out to this stage, they'll be very heavily tested, both on from a software testing point of view, and then on a hardware point of view, and virtually in simulations, and then also on closed proving grounds where the vehicles are safe. And then once you have that the vehicles are safe, and you're really just looking for corner cases and trying to measure data and stuff, that's when you start to use a test bed like this. Some cases it mightn't even be around autonomous. It could just be purely around understanding how vehicles can talk to each other interactively to CO2 emissions and things. Another piece that's of interest is low-speed maneuvering, so autonomous parking and charging. This is an area that's probably going to be one of the first areas you'll see taken off. Whereas parking, get your car, the car goes off and parks itself. I know for a lot of people that's a real headache, but that's something that a lot of rich people want. So we have to serve the markets. And then the last piece of that then is just is having a couple of mule vehicles, and this is something that I think is probably not as interesting for a company company like Jaguar Land Rover because we would have our vehicles. But if you consider if you're a startup or even if you're a that's developing radar, the capital cost of these vehicles are typically around €500,000. So just not to have to put that capital cost in, be able to go to the FMCI, book out some hours, put your sensors on and run that. That's obviously a huge boost for these type of companies. And that's something that's really what a whole part of this infrastructure is. Platform for different companies and research institutes to build off this. Skipping through, so who are we and who are the partners and the people that were involved in this? So just to give you an idea of that basically we're kind of helped put this together from a proposal point of view. Just to say that we are open to more partners coming in. It's not something that's like a closed club by any means, but these were the people that were involved in Cab Ireland from quite an early phase, and they helped back this project to get it put together basically. So there's companies like ourselves, Jaguar Land Rover, Cisco have an office in Galway, a team there that work on smart cities infrastructure. So that's something that's really great from what we want to do. GM are working the cloud-based side of things. Vallejo, obviously, the guys are doing a lot of low-speed maneuvering things from a vision point of view, and they've been doing that for many years. So that's something that really ties in well with what they're doing. Murgon as well. I don't know if they're a household name for everyone. I wasn't. It was only when I kind of moved into this area I knew more about them, but they're an Irish company based in Castlehollar. They work with nearly every OEM in the world, and it's one of those Irish success stories that you kind of don't hear about too much until you kind of start meeting these guys and talking about it. And then we have some other partners that have come on board, such as Tauglass, SGS, Piper, etc. So that's from an industry point of view. Then on the local authorities side, we've had really good backing from Clare County Council, Limerick County Council, the Western Development Commission, and then the LEOs and the Shannon Chamber. And of course, Shannon Commercial Properties are a real our key partner in this big infrastructure and the buildings, etc. So we've had very good support from them. Again, the context of this is Shannon is where the test bed will be located, but we want this to also, it's not like a West Coast, East Coast cribble or whatever type thing. This is really, we want to make this something that's useful for across the whole nation as much as possible. And then just obviously we have a lot of the research institutes they've been involved in this space for a while. Like the guys in Lero and UIG, for example, and ITS Sligo. They've been, they have programs that we're looking at machine learning interest, so they can all hopefully utilize this both from a local research point of view and from a European research point of view. So just to kind of give a quick recap on why are we doing this. One, we need a rest facility because this is you can't know it's a success until you really try it out on the roads. The collaboration piece of this is something that is, it's massive. I really would love this to become something where, we just look back in 10 years' time, and it's a bit like the medtech cluster that in Galway, for example. How many companies have come out of just a small few seeds, and that is really amazing. So if we could do something for mobility on this side, it'd be amazing to see. EU leadership. This is kind of something I always throw in there, but we're now the only. Well, I'm discounting Malta. I'm sorry if anyone from Malta is on the call, but basically we're the only country left that drives on the left-hand side of the road post-Brexit. So it's kind of something that you mightn't think about, but these vehicles will have to be certified from at least on the autonomous side, and so they'll likely have to be certified. And someone like the Road Safety Authority might have to actually certify these vehicles from a European context. So that could potentially be important. Obviously, this is a big opportunity from a business point of view. And just to go back to the industry partner slide, we've already seen companies like, for example, Seagate and Renova were there, and even just the fact that we started to tell them about the vision of what we were trying to do, they came on since we put the initial proposal in, because they can really see where this can go for them as a business point of view. So that's really what we hope to create out of this: more jobs, more investment, and then the technologies that hopefully will come with that as well. So I think, just to kind of recap all of that, I'm doing time now. Okay, I'm nearly there. Just to recap, this is building on the national strengths, and then I'll just finish with this last slide, pretty much. So, when we started this journey like a couple of years ago, we kind of looked at ourselves and thought, well, we're not known. Ireland's got nothing in this space. We've no test beds. We've nothing. And now the picture's starting to change. So just to talk a little bit about this. So today I can say that Future Mobility Campus is going to be built and funded. We're also working with the Clare County Council of Limerick on upgrading the N19 to actually, which is the road from Shannon Airport out to the motorway, to actually add the sensor set in from the FMCI into that. There's also the City Exchange project, which is in Limerick, and we're working with them to create an FMCI demonstrator in Limerick City, where we can show the public some of the use cases and demonstrate some of that for public consumption. And then the next part of that then is the CITS pilot, which is a really great project that was applied for last year by TII. It's a European project, and basically that project was awarded last summer, I think. And basically it's going to create 450 kilometers connected roads. Now you might think, okay, the roads generally have connectivity, at least the motorways, but this will put high bandwidth connectivity on this motorway. And why that's important, it's not for being able to stream Netflix as you go from Limerick to Dublin. It's really, what can we do then from a testing point of view to see how 5G can drive this forward, or even some of the other standards around Wi-Fi, etc. So this is something that is actually unique in Europe. There's a kind of standoff between technologies at the moment, between 5G and Wi-Fi. It's a bit of a Betamax VHS discussion. I won't get into it, but the important bit is that by Ireland having this mixed testbed, that's something that's of interest across Europe. So we know that, for example, other OEMs in Germany are interested to come and test here, to be able to test these different technologies. So it's something then kind of, when after going from zero, we kind of end up with this really huge, expansive testbed. And I haven't even spoken about the interesting landscapes that we have in Kerry and Clare and up in Connemara around, how do autonomous vehicles react to sheep on the road, or when there's grass in the median, all of these type of other cases that we think is a kind of unique selling point for what we're doing as well. So I think that's it. I appreciate it was whirlwind, and it was probably something like 30 slides. I hope it gave you a taste for what's happening. As I said, we're definitely, we want to be collaborative around this. So if you see something that's like, wow, this is something we want to get involved with, you just feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to get a hold of me, and we can hopefully have some discussions and move this project forward, because I think it's the scope of where this could potentially go to. And even when you think of mobility not just being road and vehicles, it could go to further afield. It's something that's really it's really exciting, and you can tell I'm excited about it. So thanks for your time. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, Carol, maybe, or maybe not, but that's it for me.